Most of us have been sold a postcard version of how a pearl, the gemstone pearl, is made. We're told a grain of sand drifts into a shell and somehow magic happens. But that's not the truth. In reality, a pearl is a biological response to a breach. Something enters not just the shell, but the living, sensitive tissue of the oyster itself. It's often a parasite or a fragment of something broken. It enters without consent and it stays. Having experienced multiple non-consensual violations personally, I've had to find the strength to hold my head high. There were moments where I was close to death, moments where for some reason or some miracle, I didn't die. When I wrongly compared myself to those who died because of their own experience, I realized I'm alive. I feel blessed to be alive. The realization, in spite of the experiences, became my anchor. But I've had to look closer at what making it out to the other side actually means. The oyster can't just let go or push out the breach. So it does the only thing it can. It initiates a response. It begins to coat that irritant in layer after layer of nacre, a mix of minerals and proteins that acts as a kind of biological glue. The pearl isn't formed despite the intrusion. It's formed because of it. And for a long time, I looked at my own survival as a fluke or just luck. But when I stopped looking at it as an accident and started seeing it as a deliberate response to wanting to live, everything changed. I realized my mind and body didn't just get lucky. They did exactly what the oyster does. They used their own internal construction, grew to bond those pieces together, wrapping my pain in something so strong I couldn't feel it anymore. Each layer is a response, a way of saying, I can't remove what happened, but I can change how it lives inside me. And over time, through layer after layer of response and endurance, something came out that was never in the original design. The irritant's still there. It never left, and it's still at the center, but it's no longer as sharp. It's no longer raw because of the way those layers interact with light. That pain has become luminous. The pearl isn't formed despite what arrived uninvited, without consent. It's formed around it. Let it go, put it behind you. I've heard those words spoken to me so many times, but I've come to realize that transformation doesn't always come from the letting go. Sometimes it comes from the strength of the glue we use to hold ourselves together, from getting to a place of acceptance of what has happened. The breach has happened. When I finally sat with that and allowed that to really sink in, the way an oyster builds, that's when I stopped seeing myself as only a victim. I started understanding those layers of protection as my survival strategies. They were the only way I knew how to navigate the inner chaos, because the connection between the unwanted thing and the beautiful thing isn't magic. For me, it's been architecture and design and my desire to not give up, to fight for me in the dark and in the light. Some fight externally. Most of my battles have been internal, done in secret, like the oyster. When that experience, that pain, entered my space without my consent, my system didn't just sit there. It began to build. A layer of distance so I can keep breathing. A layer of strength so I could keep walking. A layer of hypervigilance, my own internal construction crew to make sure I'd never be caught off guard again. For a long time, I looked at those layers and called them walls. I called them my baggage, my scars. But I've started to see them for what they actually are. the architecture of protection. And if you're anything like me, you might recognize that you are a masterpiece of engineering. Your body and your mind used everything they had, their own materials, their own proteins, their own glue, to wrap your pain in something so strong you no longer could feel it. To me, being a survivor meant the construction project worked. I was safe. The bleeding had stopped. The numbness was a success. But as I continued to sit with this, I had to ask myself a question. Is the architecture that kept me safe now the very thing keeping me small? And that question, whether my protection was actually a cage, didn't come to me in a moment of quiet meditation. It hit me in the middle of doing my work. It hit me while I realized the architecture I had built in secret was being used by the world to summarize my entire life. And it happened more than once. I'll be waiting in the wings, waiting to hear my name called. Someone at the microphone warming up the room, kind words, good energy, people peaked and ready to listen. I'll hear the leader. Please welcome our next speaker, a survivor, blah, 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 blah. And then my name, in that order. Not JK, survivor first, and then my name second. As if that was my title. As if that was the most important thing to know about me before I even opened my mouth. And I would walk out, smile, take the mic, and continue. But for a long time, I never showed anger or offense by this. I just felt this incredible regression, like I was being pulled back to the moments when I was too scared to speak, too scared to say stop. I didn't like that feeling because I didn't want to hurt anyone anymore. I didn't like that feeling because I didn't want to be hurt anymore. But on this one occasion, I didn't overthink. I just refused to regress. I smiled as I thanked the organisers for having me. And then I said with confidence that actually surprised me, my name is JK, period. And for about 30 seconds, I shared my preferred introduction. I remember saying, I'm JK first and survivor after, because to be called a survivor, I had to have experienced something. I am JK first. My experience is secondary to who I am. It was important for me to take my power back because there is power in my name and there is power in the labels we use. And survivor, when you actually understand what the word means, where it came from, what it was originally designed to do, was never my name. Survivor. It was a milestone someone turned into a full stop. So my name is JK. JK, which carries in it the first letter of my birth name, a name that means matriarch and leader, one who is empowered, not survivor, which means at its root, simply to live beyond. And yes, I lived beyond, I am living beyond, but it doesn't stop there. I don't live from my pain, I live proudly from the fading scars that took longer than a minute to fade. And that's what this episode is about. Greetings, this is Like Me Officially podcast. I'm JK, and this is where raw truths meet reflection, where I challenge social narratives, explore self-advocacy, and move beyond surviving life-changing experiences into courage, self-insurance, and thriving. Because if you're anything like me, you'll recognize that life is for living and living freely. Hashtag our time to thrive. Before I go any further, just a quick note. In this episode, I'm talking about lived experience of violence and abuse and the labels placed on us in the aftermath. I'm talking about what those labels can do to the body, mind, and a sense of self over time, and the frameworks that have helped me to move through it. Please take care of yourself as you listen. If at any point you need to pause or take a step away, do that. You matter more than this episode, and come back and listen only when you feel ready. Okay, let's begin. So, before I get into the journey, I want to spend some time on the word itself, because for me, once I understood where survivor actually came from, the original meaning and how it evolved, something shifted. The confusion I felt about why that label, that word, didn't always fit me started to make sense. The word survive comes from the Latin supervivere, super meaning over or beyond, vivere, to live. To survive literally means to live beyond. And for centuries, that's all the word meant. It was used as a legal term mostly to do with the person still living after others had died, just still here when others weren't. It's the feeling I mentioned earlier, the weight of being the one of many who is still here. The shift happened in a very specific context after the Second World War. Holocaust survivors, those who had lived through systemic genocide, began to reclaim the word with full intention. In that context, calling yourself a survivor was an act of profound agency. It said, I was targeted for annihilation and I am still here. My existence is my resistance. By the 1970s, the word had taken on, even the 1970s, the word had taken on a weight in the English language. It became aspirational and empowering, a declaration of resilience that meant more than just outlasting someone else. It meant actively persevering through something that should have broken you. As words and terms often do, Survivor began to evolve and expand into new spaces. It moved into the cancer community, where it offered a way for people to reclaim their agency. It moved into domestic abuse support and sexual violence advocacy, where it was intentionally used to replace the word victim. The goal was to provide a term that felt like strength. And in all these contexts, the word was offered with care. It was meant to be a promotion, a way of saying you aren't just what happened to you, you're the one who made it through. But here's the thing about how language evolves. When a word becomes the standard, it can start to feel less like a choice and more like a category. And for many of us, survivor arrived without the same intentionality that powered its original reclamation. It wasn't always chosen. It was often assigned, put on our forms, stamped on our medical notes. It was how we were introduced and referenced. And crucially, nobody defined what came after it. In our space, survivor started to function as an endpoint, a category, a permanent identity. It's like being given a permit to build a foundation, but being told you aren't allowed to put a roof on it. You survived. Well done. You can stop there as long as you give the world what it needs from you as a survivor within its limits. There were no terms of use, no definition of what comes next, no map, no framework for the space beyond it. And that right there is where the word stopped serving me. My body probably knew this before my mind could put words to it, because the word survivor always made me feel so uncomfortable. But I didn't understand why until I started exploring it. And if you're anything like me, that discomfort might have made you consider the lens of those who don't want to be known as a survivor. Because of the shadow that word carries, many people never share their story. They limit any discussion about their experience because they don't want to be trapped in that category forever. Oprah Winfrey, for example, is an example of this. She's been vocal about the power of choice, the right to decide which terms support our own contexts and which ones restrict them. I'm not here to pull the label apart and leave you with nothing. I'm here to say, for me, the journey didn't end at survivor. There's more road, the next level, the thriver, the person who moves from endurance into freedom. And that's not a fantasy. It's available right now. You just have to know to look for it in the distance and then see it get closer as you move towards it. Before I could see into the distance and hope before I could see into the distance and the hope that distance signified to me, I had to deal with the white noise. I had to figure out how to respond to people who use their words in what they thought was righteous and meaningful, but really it was very unhelpful. I had to learn how to clean up on aisle 9 to reduce and minimize that white noise that made my journey more possible to walk on. And there is what I'm going to call toxic phrasing. Toxic phrasing that gets said frequently in personal development spaces. Often said directly to those with lived experience of violence. You've probably heard it. People say these things happen for you, that they were a gift, that it was something you called into your life, that it was somehow meant to happen. To be clear, these criminal acts did not happen for you. It wasn't a gift. It wasn't something you asked for or manifested. It was inserted without your consent, without warning, and it changed things. If those words have ever been said to you, I'm sorry. And if they're clinging to you right now, please do a Taylor Swift and just shake it off. Because you are not to blame. It wasn't your fault, and you did nothing wrong for the harm to happen to you. The reason I need to say that with my whole chest, the reason I need us to shake off that blame is because we can't see our own brilliance if we're busy feeling guilty for what was done to us. Because what was done was harm. It was a violation. And I'm done with toxic phrasing that diminishes real harmful human experiences, period. And when I stopped blaming myself for the breach, when I started telling people to roll with their toxic phrasing, I was finally able to see the intelligence of what came next. I could see that the way my mind organized itself around it, the way my body responded, the way I adapted, all of it was my system doing exactly what it was designed to do. The labels that came after, victim, survivor, were also adaptations, ways the systems around me tried to name them. The labels that came after victim, survivor were also adaptations, ways the systems around me tried to name my own chaos, ways I tried to hold myself together. And I'm not here to take those labels away if they still serve you or they serve you. But I'm here to say those of us with lived experience have been given a bad hand when it comes to what's being shared about how to navigate the different phases of this healing journey. For too long, only part of the story has been told. We were shown how to be a victim, shown how to survive, but we weren't given the full picture of what comes next. Because there's a level beyond survivorship that brings a kind of freedom and mental clarity that genuinely can't be felt while you're still in survivor mode. And that's what I want to share, not as an instruction, but as an invitation, because the work, when you're ready for it, is yours to do, because no one can do it for you. Nobody's coming to save you. No one is going to force you to transform. And that in itself is not a burden. That's the most powerful thing I know. That's self-agency, self-efficacy, self-advocacy. It's ownership. The wisdom of knowing where you are on this journey that doesn't end, to me, is so powerful. One day, I literally stumbled onto the book of Nehemiah in the Bible. In short, Nehemiah was a man who went back to his homeland specifically to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem because the defences had all been smashed. One day, I literally stumbled onto the book of Nehemiah in the Bible. In short, Nehemiah was a man who went back to his homeland specifically to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem because the defences had all been smashed. This is where the story got me. Before the breach, I saw myself much like I described that pearl. I was whole, I was building my life, I had a design, and then it was smashed, destroyed, and I realised that someone had to choose to rebuild that wall, and that someone is me. But here's the truth of my experience. I had lived through my violations long before someone told me I was a victim. And when that label was finally dropped on me, it felt like a second bomb. It shattered me all over again because at the same time, my understanding was that a victim was hopeless. I didn't feel hopeless. I didn't want to be hopeless. I knew the victim stage wasn't where I wanted to stay. And to understand why I fought so hard to move past that label, you have to understand what a wall actually was to Nehemiah. The walls of Jerusalem were a fortified system designed for protection, function, and order within the city. When those walls were smashed, they lost all three: protection, function, and order. So when my wall was smashed, I lost my protection, which was my safety, my function, my ability to lead myself, and the order, which was my mental clarity. I became uncovered. Nehemiah didn't just build a generic line of stone. He addressed the specific gates that allowed the city to breathe and defend itself. And these map very closely to what healing actually looked like for me. So, for example, the Valley Gate, which was part of the wall, is where the work actually started, because it's the most vulnerable entry point to the hidden places, the triggers, the memories I was holding. And the healing starts where these things were avoided, because avoidance keeps the gate open for more harm to come. So I had to learn not to face the valley alone. And that is where psychological safety begins. Then there was the dung gate. The dung gate is a very unglamorous part. It was the gate used to remove the city's waste. So after harm, we carry this shame and guilt that was never ours to begin with. And the dung gate is the recognition that something harmful has stayed too long. It's the honest act of letting go of what you were never meant to carry. And this is where I finally admitted that I was exhausted. I was in pain. I was struggling. And where I realized that not being okay is the entry point for help. It's okay to not be okay. And once I stopped pretending, I could finally ask for help. There is a scripture in the Bible that I always refer to. It gives me so much hope. It says, "He gives strength to the weary and increases the power of the weak." I wrestled with God in this stage. I screamed, why me? Why did this have to happen to me? Why do I have to feel this way? Why did they let me down? Why did they do this to me? And I've been on retreats and I've sat in circles for healing. But what shifted things was finding this quote: "He gives strength to the weary and increases the power of the weak." The promise isn't motivational to cheer me up. I feel it is a recognition of exhaustion. He gives strength to the weary. Right there in it, not after. He met me where I was. He didn't ask me to be further along. It gave me permission to be tired. It gave me permission to say I'm mentally done. And from that honesty, I could ask for help. Once I started clearing the waste, I then entered the survivorship. This is progress under pressure. I was setting boundaries, but I was still being triggered. I was creating new habits and routines, but still felt extremely exhausted. I was showing up and still healing. This was my Superwoman cape stage, the one with the spotless home and the perfect professional delivery, but sitting undone in her car after a successful day because the effort of holding it all together was draining me dry. The cape looked like strength to everyone else, but it was heavy and costly to carry. And here's the bit that never sat right with me. The link and tie to those who hurt me. The label survivor felt like it kept me connected to them. To be a survivor is to be defined by what happened to you, which was caused by someone else's choices. So every time I was introduced that way, people were leading with the perpetrator's actions as the most important thing about me, not my name, not my work, not my future. To me, that wasn't liberating. That was just a more sophisticated way of being defined by someone else. The survivor identity helped me name what had happened. It validated me, yes, but I realized it was a holding space, a holding place, not a destination. I decided I deserved a name that belonged entirely to me. So in my rebuild, I looked at the gates as decision points. The Yod gate, reclaiming the wisdom that belonged to me, not my trauma. I had to ask, whose voice am I living from, the trauma or the truth? The broad wall. In the story of Nehemiah, the wall was a massive section built to withstand immense pressure. This was where I built the habits and the know that actually protected me. I had to build internal stability so I didn't fall to the level of my triggers, but rose to the level of my systems. The fountain gate. This is where I focused on renewing my mind, where my healing moved from just coping into being renewed so I wasn't just reacting to the past anymore. I tried doing this alone, and it was the most disconnected time of my life. I eventually realized I needed a crew, therapy, coaching, and friends who let me unravel in unglamorous ways. And when I didn't love myself, they reflected back patience, kindness, and space to cry. They held me accountable to my true self. And I realized God was holding my hand, but he was using their hands to help me lift the heavy stones. That's how my cape finally started to loosen. For I am the Lord your God who takes hold of your right hand and says to you, do not fear, I will help you. And in the seasons when I looked the most capable from the outside, but felt the most undone on the inside, I was reminded that I was held. And that's what started to loosen the cape's grip for me, not the pressure to do more, the knowledge and the evidence that I wasn't doing it alone. But to truly understand why my cape had such a tight grip and why my body stayed in the white knuckle mode even when I wanted to let it go, I had to look at what was happening under the surface, the science of the nervous system. Dr. Gabor Mate says something foundational. Trauma isn't what happened to you, it's what happened inside you as a result of what happened to you. The event happened outside, the wound happened inside, and for me, that wound was a disconnection from my body, from myself, from the internal cues that would normally tell me what I needed. And I think about it like scar tissue. Scar tissue is tough, it's protective, but it doesn't move. It's not flexible. When my survival became my scar tissue, my nervous system got stuck in one mode. And this is what that actually looked like in my daily life. The flight response became my overworking. I couldn't sit still. I stayed perpetually busy because silence and stillness felt dangerous to me. Fight became my need for control. Everything had to be done just so because unpredictability once meant harm. Freeze became my numbness. I was physically there but mentally checked out, disconnected from my own joy. And fawn became my endless yes. I had no boundaries, making myself small to keep the peace because somewhere in my body, conflict still felt like a threat. I had to stop being my own harshest critic and start being a curious observer. I started asking, I wonder what my body is still trying to protect me from right now. And that shift from self-criticism to curiosity is where healing started to become possible for me. The nervous system can't be shamed into changing. It can only be offered safety. And curiosity is a form of safety. The scariest part for me was the transition. I truly thought if I took off that cape, I'd become a victim again. I was terrified. Would I be depressed? Would my unhealthy patterns resurface? Removing that cape meant I would be seen. People would see me. And the thought of that was paralyzing because what would they think? It meant I had to show up as me, not in the various versions that society requires from me. I thought my fierce independence, that I could do it all myself energy, was my power. But I realized the cape was like an umbrella. It saved me from the pouring rain. It was a brilliant adaptation. I wouldn't have made it through the storm without it, but I looked up and realized the sun was out. And if I kept holding that heavy umbrella up in the sunshine, I couldn't reach out to hold anyone else's hand. I couldn't build a future if I was still braced for a storm that had already passed. I didn't need to protect myself from the world anymore. I needed to reintroduce myself to it. And that reintroduction is what it means to be a thriver. For me, thriving isn't a fixed state. It's not a destination where I unpack my bags and I say, I am done. Thriving feels like continuous flows of oxygen. I don't arrive at oxygen, I breathe it in continuously. It's what sustains me while I do the work of maintenance. And as a victim, I was stuck in the past. Things were happening to me. As a survivor, I was managing the present, protecting myself from things. And as a thriver, I am creating the future, seeking growth and opportunity wherever I can. This is what I call the living fortress. The walls are actually doing their job. I'm not just safe, I am fruitful. This is the King's Garden, living in purpose. But let's be honest, a fortress needs maintenance. The work continues, but it's a different kind of work. I've spent so much time in the shadows that I'm still learning how to live in the light. Sometimes I still find a weak spot in the structure, a brick that's come loose, but I'm not surviving anymore. I'm choosing to face those strongholds, using the blueprints I found in the Bible and the insights from neuroscience and those with much more wisdom than me to keep my walls sound and the grass blooming. I think about kintsugi, the Japanese art of repairing broken pottery with gold. The cracks aren't hidden or disguised. They are filled with gold and made visible. The philosophy is that the breakage is part of the history of the object. It isn't something to conceal. Because healing isn't erasing the past, it's integrating it into a limitless future. The whole point of my fortress isn't just about keeping the bad stuff out. It's about making sure whatever is inside is actually worth protecting, and being so self-aware that I can quickly identify the areas that need attention. And if there's still self-rejection sitting behind the walls or within the bricks, or there's cracks, even the strongest gates won't give me peace. This is my kintsugi moment. The cracks are golden. My scars are fading, but they are there, and they are mine, and they tell a story worth telling. So beyond thriving, I discovered something even deeper: collective post-traumatic growth. This is the moment when my healing stopped being just about my own safety and started becoming a resource for the world. The first layer is individual healing, and I've categorized them into individual healing, community connection, and societal transformation. So the individual healing part was my first step, shedding that superwoman cape. I had to get brutally honest about what that cape was actually protecting and return to my authentic essence underneath all those adaptations. This was the hardest layer for me, but the most important. Nothing that follows is possible without it. I had to put my own oxygen mask on first, because if I couldn't breathe, I had nothing to give to anybody else. The second layer, the community connection, this is about breaking the secrecy. I had to find the people who know, not just people who've been told about pain, but people who genuinely understood. Because being held by a community didn't diminish me. It was where a huge part of my healing actually happened. Trauma is often multi-generational precisely because it stays hidden in the shadows, and speaking the truth, even to just one safe person, begins to break that cycle. And community was the hardest layer for me because part of my story includes community. Community I trusted letting me down. I'm not talking about a cult, I'm talking about family and culture. So community beyond the fancy words is simply about trust, and trust for me holds many things, including trust in myself. Because if you can't trust others, maybe you need to learn to first trust yourself. And the societal transformation part or layer, this is using my voice on my own terms to change what's acceptable. I had to ask, if not now, then when? Because no one is promised tomorrow, and how dare I take from this world without giving back? This for me isn't a performance, it isn't an obligation. It's the natural outgrowth of a healing that has gone deep enough to want to protect others from the same experience. And as my journey evolved, the mask I had put on for myself became something I could make available to others. Not to force it on them or prescribe when or how they should use it, but to hold it out and say, if you want to breathe, here is how I learned to breathe. This is how Like Me Officially podcast actually came about. My pain was real. It was life-changing. It altered everything, and it deserves to be named exactly as it was. But eventually, my pain became a story. My story became a purpose, and that purpose became a source of power, not just for me, but for everyone I chose to share it with or choose to share it with. Pain to story, story to purpose, purpose to power, on my timeline, not anyone else's. And as Dr. Mate says, we may not be responsible for how the world created our minds, but we can take responsibility for the mind with which we create our world. So where does that leave me, us, I, you? I'm not asking anybody to drop their labels. I believe your life, your choice. Use what serves you. If Survivor has given you community, language, a way of understanding what happened, honor that. It did exactly what it was supposed to do at the time you needed it most. But what I will do is invite you to do your own research on the psychological effects of staying in survivor mode as a lifelong destination. Not because I'm prescribing anything, but because knowledge is agency and you deserve to know the full picture. I also want to invite you with compassion, not criticism, to look at where survival mode might still be running in your life. The overworking, the inflexibility, the difficulty saying no, the thing you use to quieten the alarm that won't switch off, the need for control. I've learned to reframe these not as failures, but as information. The nervous system still protecting, faithfully, loyally, from a danger that isn't there anymore. And know this, you're not broken, you're not behind, you're not doing this wrong. You're somewhere on a journey that doesn't end, and the wisdom is simply in knowing where you're standing today. The moment I realised how the word survivor was being used in the way society had dictated it, when I understood it was only meant for a season, I decided to reclaim and reframe my journey. I took the step to move myself beyond survivor, waking up to this altered the way I view words and the labels used in society. If a word, phrase, or term isn't intended to grow me, then it's not for me, period. I can't tell you how long the transformation takes. What I know from my own journey is that I delayed periods of my transformation because I didn't respect the season of change I was in. I was too busy surviving. Not respecting the season meant I stayed in a place for far too long. Change is an internal team effort. The whole body has to participate. And my encouragement or invitation is to do the work. Our healing is made possible by the work of others who came before us. But we still have to walk the path. Nobody can do that for us. And there's something powerful in that. It's ownership. Do not be conformed to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing on your mind, is a line from the Bible which I love. I've always loved the idea of not being conformed to the patterns of the world. I suppose it translates into the work that I do. But being transformed, not fixed, not recovered, transformed. The renewing of the mind isn't a one-time event. It's ongoing. It's daily. It's a choice over and over again to see yourself and your journey differently. That framing gave me agency in a way nothing else has. I wasn't just healing from something. I was becoming something. Those are very different experiences. The pearl in you is still forming. The cracks are still being filled with gold. The journey isn't over. So I will leave you with this question. If Survivor was a milestone and not a destination, where are you standing now? And what name are you choosing for yourself today? If you're open to sharing, come find me in the Substack chat. No pressure, just vibes. Thank you for listening to this episode of Like Me podcast. If anything I've shared has made you stop, think, or see yourself just a little bit clearer, fantastic. I love this for you. I love this for me. And honestly, I love this for us. And if this episode shifted something in you, give yourself a moment to sit with it. And if anything felt a little bit too heavy, speak to someone you trust. What I've learnt is that we don't heal in isolation, and you don't have to carry any of this alone. This space isn't about staying in survival mode. It's about lifting ourselves out of the dimension that has tried to keep us trapped and choosing a version of ourselves that's still becoming. If this resonates with you, share with someone who might need a reminder or a friend. And make sure you're following the podcast so you don't miss the next episode. I'm JK. Stay open, stay self-curious, and remember, it's our time to thrive.